In the grand halls of music academies and glittering theaters, talent is celebrated, but only when it comes wrapped in the right name, the right background, and the right connections. Emma? She had none of that. Just an old mop, a quiet spirit, and a love for music that never had a stage. To the world, she was invisible, a cleaning girl, lost in the shadows of other people's brilliance. But what no one knew was that every night, after the crowds left and the lights dimmed, she stayed behind, not to clean, but to dream. And on one unexpected evening, when the pianist vanished and the audience grew restless, destiny gave her a chance. A single moment. A single note. And when her fingers touched those keys, nothing would ever be the same again. Emma had always moved through the halls of the Westbrook Conservatory of Music like a shadow, quiet, invisible, and easily overlooked. To the students and faculty, she was simply the janitor, the girl in the navy blue uniform who swept the floors and emptied the trash. But behind that plain appearance was a heart that beat in rhythm with music, and fingers that longed to dance across piano keys instead of mops and brooms. Each night, after the lights dimmed and the grand auditorium emptied of talent and applause, Emma found herself alone in the silence. It was in those fragile, fleeting moments that she allowed her true self to surface. She would step onto the grand stage, not as a janitor, but as someone who had lived her life on the edge of melody. Her fingertips hovered over the piano keys with reverence, not daring to play, not yet, but tracing the cold ivory as if trying to absorb the courage of every musician who had ever performed there. Inside, she felt both wonder and heartbreak. Wonder at the beauty of music that always felt like home. Heartbreak that she had spent her life on the outside of that world, never chosen, never believed in. And yet, no matter how exhausted she was or how harsh the world had been that day, Emma came back to that stage like a ritual, searching for something. Maybe hope. Maybe herself. For weeks, Emma had felt the stirrings of something deep within her, an undeniable urge to break free from the confines of her quiet existence. The soft hum of the auditorium, the muted rustle of pages, the distant chatter, all these had become a monotonous backdrop to the swirling chaos inside her. Each day, she had pushed her desires further down, burying them beneath layers of routine and responsibility. But tonight, something had shifted. As the clock ticked past midnight, the silence in the building seemed to press in on her. The stage lights, long dimmed, flickered on with a soft glow, casting long shadows across the empty seats. Emma found herself standing at the edge of the stage, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt as though the very floor beneath her feet was holding its breath, waiting for her to make a choice. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of expectation or the burden of others' demands. It was as if the world itself had stopped turning, giving her a rare, fragile moment to finally listen to the voice she had silenced for so long. Without thinking, she moved toward the grand piano, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. Her fingers brushed against the cool, polished surface, and she could almost feel the piano waiting for her, as though it had always known she would come back to it. A quiet tremor ran through her, not of fear, but of something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. The weight of all her unspoken dreams, the symphonies that had played in her mind but never left her lips, felt like they were about to burst free. She sat down, her hands hovering over the keys for a brief moment, her breath catching in her throat. The first note she played was tentative, unsure, like a whisper into the darkness. But as her fingers began to find their rhythm, the music grew stronger, more urgent. She no longer felt like the quiet, overlooked assistant, she felt like an artist, alive for the first time in what felt like forever. Each chord she struck was a declaration, a quiet rebellion against the life she had been living. It wasn't perfect, it didn't need to be. The imperfections only made it more real, more hers. But just as the melody reached its crescendo, Emma felt a cold shiver slide down her spine. The music, once so all-consuming, suddenly seemed out of place. It was then that she heard it, the slow, deliberate sound of clapping coming from the back of the auditorium. The sharp echo of the clap cut through the music like a blade, and Emma's heart seized in her chest. She stopped mid-play, her fingers frozen over the keys. The familiar fear crept in, the old doubt, the feeling of being exposed, caught. Someone had been watching. The claps rang out, mocking, like a judgment passed on a fleeting dream. She turned toward the sound, her face pale, her breath shallow. The figure in the back of the room was barely visible in the dim light, but their presence was unmistakable. Someone had witnessed her vulnerability. The warmth of the music still lingered in the air, but it felt like it had been ripped away, leaving her standing exposed and raw. Emma's throat tightened, and for a moment, she felt utterly alone. The applause, though not kind, had drawn out a part of her she wasn't ready to face. But that single clap, though painful, was a reminder, no matter how hidden, the music had always been there, waiting for its chance to be heard. The silence that fell over the room was suffocating, as if the world itself had frozen in time. Emma stood there, her heart thundering in her chest, trying to process what had just happened. The music, the melody she had poured so much of herself into, had ended, but the ripple of its impact still lingered in the air. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides as she tried to steady herself. She had escaped into that song, letting the notes carry her into a place where nothing mattered but the music. But now, that sanctuary was shattered by a single, sharp sound. The clap echoed through the darkness, slicing through her concentration with brutal force. Emma's head snapped up, her breath caught in her throat. The figure at the back of the room was barely visible, cloaked in shadow, yet she could feel his eyes on her, heavy and unblinking. It was impossible to ignore the weight of his gaze, even though she couldn't make out his features. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and a chill ran down her spine. She hadn't expected anyone to be there. No one was supposed to be here. This was her space, her retreat, a quiet place where she could hide from the expectations and demands of the world. But now, that illusion was broken. She wasn't alone. And whoever this person was, they were watching her, waiting for something. Her breath quickened, and her mind began to spiral with 1,000 unanswered questions. Who was this person? How long had they been there? Was he someone she knew, someone who had come to judge her, or someone with answers she desperately needed? She felt the urge to flee, to run out of the room and away from whatever had just been awakened in her. But the weight of her own fear, the overwhelming sense that she was about to face something far bigger than she could comprehend, rooted her to the spot. Slowly, she straightened her back, summoning the courage to confront this unknown presence. She couldn't afford to back down now. Not after everything. Not after everything she had buried inside herself for so long. She took a deep breath, her lungs burning slightly as she exhaled, and then she stepped forward, cautiously, her eyes never leaving the figure in the dark. With each step, her resolve hardened, even though her mind screamed at her to turn around and run. The man took a deliberate step forward, breaking the distance between them with an air of inevitability. The faint light from the back row of seats illuminated his figure just enough for her to see his silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, almost menacing in the way he seemed to fill the space with his presence. But it wasn't just his physical stature that made her pulse race. It was the feeling that he knew something about her, something that she had yet to even acknowledge herself. His voice finally broke the silence, low and measured, like the calm before a storm. "I should have known it was you." His words were not accusatory, but they felt like a verdict, a statement as certain as the sun rising in the morning. "You've been hiding for so long, haven't you?" Emma's breath hitched. Her chest tightened, and her mind screamed for answers. She had no idea who this man was, no idea what he was talking about. But something about his tone, about the way he spoke, made her feel like he was prying into the very depths of her soul. She wanted to ask him who he was, why he was here, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she just stared at him, wide-eyed, trying to make sense of the emotions that were surging within her. Fear, confusion, and something else, something deeper, more primal, all swirled inside her. The man didn't wait for her response. He took another step closer, and she instinctively took a small step back, her body betraying the fear she was trying to suppress. "I'm not here to harm you," he said, his voice softer now, almost reassuring. "I'm here to help you." She could feel the walls she had built around herself beginning to crack, each word he spoke chipping away at the carefully constructed defenses she had so meticulously erected. Her thoughts raced, trying to process the meaning of his words. Help her? Help her with what? She had spent years running from her past, burying everything that threatened to disrupt the fragile peace she had found. And now this stranger, this man, was suggesting that she face it. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. She shook her head slightly, as if to clear the fog that had descended on her mind. "I don't need help. I don't need anyone." The man's eyes softened, though they still held that knowing, unnerving intensity. "You've been running, Emma. And it's time to stop." His words struck her like a punch to the gut. How did he know her name? How did he know what she had been running from? For a moment, she felt a flicker of panic, her mind racing through the memories she had locked away. The music, the empty spaces, the quiet longing that had never quite gone away. It all came rushing back in a flood she wasn't prepared for. "I can't," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I can't face it." "You already are," he said softly. "And you will, whether you like it or not." Emma closed her eyes, the weight of his words sinking deep into her chest. The walls around her heart were beginning to crumble, and with it, the life she had known, the life she had fought to protect, was slowly slipping away. And in that moment, Emma understood. She wasn't running anymore. She was standing on the precipice of something much bigger than herself. Something she couldn't ignore, no matter how much she wanted to. The silence between them seemed to stretch endlessly, thick and suffocating. Emma stood frozen in place, her breath shallow and quick, her mind struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. The weight of the man's presence pressed against her, not with force, but with an unspoken pressure that made her feel like she was being held underwater. She wanted to speak, to break the silence with words that would make sense of this moment, but nothing came. It felt as though her voice had been stolen, and in its absence, she was left alone with her thoughts, thoughts that were as heavy and suffocating as the air around her. The man's gaze was unwavering, his eyes locked onto hers with a quiet intensity that sent a ripple of unease through her. Emma wanted to look away, to escape from that penetrating stare, but something in him held her there, like a spell she couldn't break. His presence was commanding, yet oddly reassuring, and it unsettled her all the more. She had spent years building a life for herself, one where no one knew her secrets, where she could exist without the fear of facing the truth. But now, in front of this man, she realized how fragile that facade had always been. "You don't understand," Emma finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling with a mixture of frustration and fear. She clenched her fists at her sides, nails biting into the palms of her hands as if the pain would ground her, would make her feel something other than the overwhelming panic that threatened to overtake her. "I've worked so hard to get here. I've built something real. I can't just throw it all away. I can't go back to the way it was." Her words hung in the air, shaky and unsure, but they were all she had. She wanted him to understand. She wanted him to see that this was more than just a choice, it was a sacrifice. the life she had now was everything she had ever wanted, everything she had fought for. And if she allowed herself to confront what lay behind her, if she allowed herself to confront the past she had buried so deeply, it would destroy everything she had worked so hard to create. The man, however, didn't seem moved by her protest. His face remained impassive, yet there was something in his eyes, something like pity, or perhaps understanding, that made her stomach twist with unease. "You think this is about throwing everything away," he said softly, his voice steady and calm, like a cool breeze cutting through the heat of the moment. "But it's not. It's about finally being free. Free from the lies you've been telling yourself for years." His words hit her like a slap, each one carrying a weight that landed heavily on her chest. She had always believed that the life she had built was enough, that the distance she had put between herself and the past was sufficient to protect her from the things she feared most. But now, hearing him speak those words, she realized how much she had been fooling herself. The past wasn't something you could escape from, it was something you carried with you, whether you wanted to or not. Emma took a step back, her mind racing, her heart pounding in her chest. The walls she had built to protect herself from the truth were crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The weight of his words, of his presence, pressed against her like a storm building on the horizon, threatening to tear everything apart. She wanted to run. She wanted to escape from the reality that he was forcing her to face, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but something else, something deeper, was pulling her toward him. "You think you can outrun this, Emma," he continued, his voice still calm, but now tinged with a quiet urgency. "But the truth is still inside you. It's always been inside you. And if you don't face it, if you don't confront it, it will destroy everything. You. Your life. Your future." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she looked at him, her eyes wide and filled with confusion and fear. She wanted to shout at him, to tell him he was wrong, that he didn't know what he was talking about. But deep down, a small, quiet voice inside her whispered that he was right. She couldn't keep running. She couldn't keep pretending. Her chest tightened as tears began to sting at the corners of her eyes. She fought to hold them back, but the pressure of everything, the weight of her past, the fear of facing it, the shame of having buried it so deep, was too much. The dam inside her broke, and she felt the tears spill over, hot and raw. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if saying it out loud would make it more real. "I don't know if I can face it." For a long moment, the man didn't respond. He simply watched her, his eyes softening with something that resembled empathy. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle, almost kind. "You don't have to do it alone, Emma," he said quietly. "But you can't keep running. Not anymore." The words seemed to hang in the air, hanging like a lifeline thrown to someone who wasn't sure if they could reach it. And yet, despite the fear gnawing at her, despite the overwhelming weight of it all, Emma found herself taking a tentative step forward. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. She wasn't sure if she was ready. She wasn't sure if she could do what he was asking of her. But as she looked into his eyes, eyes that held no judgment, only understanding, she realized that, for the first time in years, she was ready to stop running. Emma's breath hitched as she moved closer, her body tense and uncertain, the very weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. Every step toward the man felt as though she was crossing a threshold, a point of no return, and she was acutely aware of the way the ground beneath her seemed to shift with each uncertain footfall. The security she had built over the years, a fortress of emotional walls and carefully constructed masks, began to crack, and she felt the familiar pull of fear, the urge to retreat, to escape from the overwhelming tide of vulnerability that threatened to sweep her away. Her heart drummed a frantic rhythm in her chest, the old, instinctive fight-or-flight response stirring within her, making her body ache to flee. But as she stood there, caught between the desire to protect herself and the need to face the truth, something inside her stirred. It wasn't courage, not in the way she had imagined it. It wasn't the boldness of someone charging into battle without hesitation. It was more fragile than that, a quiet sense of surrender, as though she was finally allowing herself to feel the pain and the fear she had worked so hard to avoid. She hadn't realized how much of her life had been spent running from this very moment, this choice, this truth, until now, when it was right in front of her, impossible to ignore. A shudder passed through her as she thought about how much she had sacrificed in her attempts to bury her past, the hours spent pretending, the endless stream of half-truths and evasions that had kept the real Emma hidden from everyone, even from herself. It had been easier, she'd convinced herself, to keep pretending that nothing was wrong, to maintain a facade of control. But now, standing before him, the man who had unknowingly become both her anchor and her mirror, she felt the weight of it all. It was too much to carry alone anymore. It was like holding a secret so heavy, it threatened to break her in two. "I'm not ready," she murmured, barely above a whisper, her voice shaky as the words left her lips. They felt like a confession, a betrayal of all the years she had spent suppressing the truth. The moment felt surreal, as though she were standing on the edge of a precipice, about to take a leap into the unknown. She didn't know if she could do it. The past was so tangled, so messy. And yet, there was something in her gut telling her that this was the only way forward, that there was no healing without facing the wound head-on. He was silent for a long moment, just watching her, and Emma felt herself growing restless beneath his gaze. But then he spoke, his voice calm, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world, as if he understood better than anyone else what she was going through. "You don't have to be ready right now, Emma," he said softly. "This isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to start." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. They were simple, but they settled deep within her, like a seed planted in the soil of her soul. She wasn't expected to have everything figured out. She wasn't expected to be perfect. She just needed to take the first step, whatever that meant. And in that moment, Emma's shoulders seemed to loosen slightly, her breath easing as the tension that had held her so tightly in its grip began to ebb away. It was as if the permission she had always needed to give herself had finally arrived, not in a grand gesture, but in a quiet, undeniable truth. She didn't have to be whole. She just had to be willing to try. For a long time, Emma had been trapped in the belief that the past was a place she couldn't go back to, a place that would swallow her whole if she dared to confront it. But now, she could feel the pieces of herself, those long-forgotten pieces, beginning to stir, as though they were waking up from a deep slumber, ready to be reclaimed. The fear was still there, lingering like a shadow, but it no longer felt insurmountable. There was something almost freeing about acknowledging it, about admitting that she was, in fact, afraid. Because in that admission, there was the possibility of change. There was hope. A fragile smile tugged at the corners of her lips, the first one in what felt like an eternity. It wasn't much, just a glimmer of something new, but it was enough. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding back until this very moment, and the relief that flooded her was almost overwhelming. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, embarrassed by the tears she hadn't expected, but there was no shame in them now. They weren't a sign of weakness, they were a sign of being alive, of being willing to feel again. "I don't know what this means," she said, her voice thick with emotion, but there was something resolute in her tone now. "I don't know where this is going. But I can't keep pretending. I've spent so much time running from this, from myself. But I can't do it anymore. I need to face it." The man nodded, the same knowing, patient smile on his face, as if he had been waiting for her to come to this conclusion on her own. There was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. "That's all anyone can do," he said quietly. "Take it one step at a time. That's all you can control." In that moment, Emma realized that she wasn't alone in this. She wasn't expected to have all the answers, nor did she have to be the person she once was. All she had to do was take the first step. And with that, a feeling of peace, a soft, steady warmth, began to settle within her chest, replacing the anxiety and the uncertainty that had been her constant companions for so long. The path ahead was still unclear, but for the first time in years, Emma allowed herself to believe that she could navigate it. With each breath, she felt herself growing stronger, more centered, ready to face whatever came next. The truth would no longer hold her captive. She was ready to live it, to embrace it, and to finally move forward. That night, the theater fell silent, not out of disappointment, but in awe. The girl they never noticed became the name no one could forget. Not because she was perfect, or because she belonged to the elite, but because she poured her soul into every note. Raw. Honest. Real. Emma didn't ask for applause. She didn't crave fame. All she wanted was to be heard, just once. And when she was, the world finally understood, greatness doesn't always wear a tuxedo. Sometimes, it wears a janitor's uniform and walks quietly through the back door. Her story isn't just about music. It's about courage. About waiting patiently for the moment that changes everything, and being brave enough to take it.